Hello, my name is Marcela Ordonez, and this video is going to be about student athletes and mental health. My argument going into this research is that mental health challenges faced by male college basketball and football players are deeply shaped and reinforced by historical legacies of athletic culture, cultural norms of masculinity that discourage emotional vulnerability, and economic and political pressures of collegiate sports. So, to start with a little history, college athletics is governed by the National Collegiate Athletics Association, also known as the NCAA. The NCAA has evolved over time and has shaped the modern structure of sports. The biggest principle that the NCAA enforces is this concept of amateurism. As Poland describes, the NCAA pretty much makes it so that athletes cannot be paid to play, and this differentiates professionals and amateurs. Athletes who participate in college sports are essentially doing it as a hobby, which led to the term student athlete to make the distinction that they are not employees, rather, they are still students. Prior to that intervention of the NCAA, college athletics were very brutal. Eckenrod and Naum described that there were a number of severe injuries and even deaths tied to football, which led to President Theodore Roosevelt creating the NCAA to regulate athletics. Ultimately, the history of college athletics is deeply tied to these traditions of masculinity, brutality, and even toughness, creating a hypermasculine identity that is still prevalent in today's athletic society. So elaborating on the masculine culture that exists, Steinfeld conducted a psychological study of conformity to masculinity norms in college athletics, essentially stating that athletics socialize men into cultural masculine expectations, and the results show that there was a hegemonic masculine culture within college football. Garfield adds that men are socialized from childhood to be fearless and emotionally restrained, which negatively influences their attitudes towards seeking health assistance. And Ryan et al. Does a great job of connecting the first two articles in that he describes how demanding schedules and fear of failure in college athletics, they heighten those mental strains. And he also adds that they also add that cultural expectations of toughness, they reinforce hegemonic masculinity, and they explain how coaching and athletic systems contribute to mental health pressures. Moving on to some economic factors that contribute to mental health strains on student athletes. I first want to note that college football and men's basketball are the most watched college sports in the US, which is why these factors apply heavily to them. The first being commercialism, which focuses on profit. Lumpkin discusses that this increasing financial interest shifts the focus from education to revenue generation, where athletes are treated more as commodities than as humans. He also notes that factors like demanding schedules, long training hours, and performance pressures, they interfere with athletics' academic success and personal well-being. The second economic factor I want to discuss is conference realignment. Conference realignment is simply when colleges switch athletic conferences. So if you've ever watched college sports, I'm sure you heard of Pac-12 or Big Ten. These are different conferences. Smith and Hattery mentioned that conference realignment is driven by financial incentives such as TV contracts, increased media exposure, and even revenue generating opportunities, which creates a business-like model that prioritizes profit over the athlete's well-being. One main point to note is that athletes are rarely included in these conference realignment decisions, even when they are the ones that are directly affected by them. And some of the ways that these athletes are impacted include disruptions to their travel schedules, so they can go from traveling 2 hours to traveling for 5 hours. Their academic routines are disrupted as well, which generates more academic stress, and overall stability is disrupted as well. Ultimately, both of these economic factors, they create an environment where stress, exhaustion, and emotional strain, they're normalized. And especially within this culture where men are expected to suck it up, this plays a contributing role into the mental health challenges faced by college football and men's basketball players. Lastly, I want to get into this contract called the National Letter of Intent, Within the athletic world, there's this big day called signing day, where athletes are celebrated for signing an athletic contract with a college. The contract they sign is called the National Letter of Intent, which is essentially an agreement between the institution and the prospective athlete, which states that a prospect will receive financial aid for a year if they agree to commit to their school for a year. Mayer discusses in their article that the National Letter of Intent expresses an unequal power dynamic that benefits the universities over the students. And some of the ways that it does it is by limiting the athlete's control and bargaining power. So the contract is structured in a take it or leave it kind of way, so they can't negotiate anything. And it also ensures program stability. So institutions can sign athletes to make sure that their program gets enough players with the intention that they might not even play the athlete. And if an athlete chooses to leave the institution, that if they choose to leave an institution prior to that 1 year, they are breaking the contract and um, suffer some consequences. So overall, this agreement has a one-size-fits-all structure that ignores athletes' individual needs and well-being. And going back to the concept of signing day, it's a really big day for athletes, and they face pressures to make these binding decisions, which increases stress, anxiety, and feelings of entrapment. And ultimately, the National Letter of Intent just kind of reflects this larger culture of college sports, and one that celebrates control and performance while overlooking the stress and anxiety and vulnerability that are experienced by these prospective athletes who sign it. In doing my research, I came across an article by Egan that emphasizes that exercise associated with college sports is good for anxiety and depression. Additionally, participation in athletics, it creates a social support for an easier transition into college. And assistance from peers, coaches, and trainers, they reduce this mental strain on athletes. And although these make excellent points at reducing some strain on athletes, they are overshadowed by each of the factors that I just previously discussed. Where the history of college athletics, it generates expectations that still appear in, today's athletic society. The culture of masculinity reinforces stigmas towards mental health care and seeking it. Economic interests, they drive college athletic programs to focus on financials rather than education and athletics, mental well-being. And lastly, institutions, they prove time and time again that the mental well-being of their athletes means nothing in comparison, to the control and power over, these athletes. And Puri and Sood, they made a great point that I want to quote, positive mental health is extremely important for long-term success of student athletes. So it's not just about performance and what these athletes have to offer. They should be getting something in return, for being an athlete. Positive mental health is highly important. So the research that was conducted, had a large interdisciplinary approach. Some of the disciplines that were pulled from, include psychology and the mental health aspect of this research, sociology and the institutional powers at play, anthropology in the masculine culture that was reinforced, and, education, and the focus on college students. Other concepts, include positionality and reflexivity, which were proposed by Campbell and Lassitier in, their book. Going into this research, I understood that my background as an athlete would inevitably shape how I approach the topic. And throughout the process, my interpretation of the sources and the way I chose to present the information, they were influenced by my own experiences, my perspectives, and my familiarity with the athletic culture. Acknowledging this is part of my reflexivity, recognizing how my positionality, it plays a part in the questions that I ask and the conclusions I draw. Building on my research, there are several important, directions that future scholars can take. First, conducting ethnographic studies on specific mental health challenges would give deeper insight, into how male football and basketball athletes actually experience issues like anxiety, depression, or even just pressure in general. It would also be valuable, excuse me, to investigate the culture surrounding recruitment and how that transition from high school to college affects athletes' mental well-being. And, lastly, another possible area for future research is examining commercialism, in high revenue generating programs and understanding how commercial pressures shape athletes' daily lives, expectations, stress levels, et cetera. And this can help build a more complete picture of mental health challenges within college athletics. Thank you.